I'm here, of course, with the first rule of punk. Towards the end of last week's reading, Malu and Mrs. Hidalgo were making vegan polvorones, and let's see what happens after that. I turned on the warm water and soaped up my hands as Mrs. Hidalgo and I worked. I tried to get a closer look at the tattoos on her arms without being too obvious. On her right forearm, she had a cluster of pink and orange flowers that looked like balls of tiny petals. Kind of like something you draw with a spirograph, repeating the pattern of tiny petals over and over. Below that, on her wrist, she had two sets of initials written in black script, inside an anatomical heart. On her other arm, there was an image of a girl. The girl looked like Pippi Longstocking, except she had black braids sticking up on either side of her head. Instead of Pippi's white freckled face, the girl's tattooed face was brown and round with thick lips and a wide nose. She sort of resembled one of those huge stone Olmec heads. She wore striped socks like Pippi and what looked like an embroidered Mexican dress, the kind Mom owned, belts crisscrossed over her chest. "Is that supposed to be Pippi Longstocking?" I asked. "This," Mrs. Hidalgo said, looking down at her arm, "is La Pippi. She looks like Pippi Longstocking, but not. When I was a kid, I was so obsessed with Pippi Longstocking books that one year I decided to dress up as her for Halloween. I had the red wig and the mismatched socks and two big shoes." Mrs. Hidalgo smiled, remembering her costume. "My mommy made a patchwork dress even though she had no idea who Pippi Longstocking was. I even painted some freckles on my nose. I went all out." "I've read those books," I said. "Cool costume idea." "I thought so too," Mrs. Hidalgo said, until one of my friends laughed at me. "Why?" I asked. She thought it was funny because Pippi is white and, well, obviously I'm not. "But it was Halloween," I said. "The point of dressing up is that you can be anyone." "Right?" Mrs. Hidalgo said. I was 9, and it never really dawned on me that I couldn't be Pippi, or anyone else for that matter. Not just on Halloween, but whenever. Mrs. Hidalgo carefully placed the powdered cookies into a storage container. "Anyways, I drew this character when I was in college," she said. "It's Pippi with a Mexican twist to remind me that I shouldn't let others decide who I can be." "I like it," I said. "Does it help? Remind you, I mean? Believe it or not, it does." "That's really cool," I said, rolling the last of the polvorones. "Well, mija, you've earned your cookies," Mrs. Hidalgo said. "Thank you for helping." She wiped her hands on her apron and placed a few cookies onto a plate. "Share these with the band, okay? I'll be right down." "Thanks," I said. This was fun. I took the cookies and headed to the basement, ready to start our first official band practice. "About time," Joe said as I came down the stairs. "Benny couldn't have learned how to play the bass 5 times by now." "Relax, I've got cookies," I said, "and your mom." I set the plate down on the floor. Benny immediately pounced. "These cookies taste interesting," Ellie said, biting into one and studying it closely. "If you aren't going to eat it, gimme," Benny said. He snatched what was left of the cookie out of Ellie's hand. Ellie tried to take it back. "Yo, stop it," Joe said. "You fools are going to break something in here." "Sorry," Benny said. He and Ellie tried to clean up the cookie crumbs that had scattered. When Joe's mom got to the basement, we officially started band practice. My job was to rewrite some of the lyrics to Blitzkrieg Bop and get rid of objectionable content, as Mrs. Hidalgo had suggested. So I turned it into Back to School Bop. This was a performance at school after all. But I ended up mostly watching while Mrs. Hidalgo went from Ellie to Benny to Joe, helping each one with their parts. She showed them chords, where to move their hands, and which part of the drums to hit and when. She was like a cool, good-smelling punk rock teacher. I felt jealous that Joe had her as a mom. And watching them together made me miss Dad even more. Joe and Benny played until their fingers started to blister. Ellie really seemed to understand what it meant to set the rhythm. It was almost like she discovered a talent she never knew she had. It made sense to me. She seemed like the kind of kid who was determined to do well at everything she tried. The afternoon flew by, and when I finally looked at my phone, I saw that it was already after 5. "I gotta head out," Benny said. "Thanks for the help, Mrs. H." "Anytime, Benny," Mrs. Hidalgo replied. "It's good to see you hanging out with Joe again. You used to be so close." "Yeah, this was fun," Benny said, and he bumped fists with Joe. "We need to practice every day until the audition," I said. "Cool?" Benny nodded and held out his fist to me and Ellie, and we bumped them too. "We definitely need practice," Ellie said, following Benny out, "in case none of you noticed." "Oh, we noticed," Joe said. He flailed his arms in exaggerated air drumming motion. "See ya, Sheila E." "Who's Sheila E?" Ellie asked. "Only one of the greatest drummers ever," Mrs. Hidalgo said. Ellie gave her a thumbs up and grinned. "I should head out too," I said, walking over to the crates of records. "Be very careful with those," Joe said. He looked over at Mrs. Hidalgo, who was wrapping up a guitar cord, and whispered menacingly, "Or she'll kill you." how to handle records, I said, flipping through the albums made me think of being at Spins and Needles. I grew up in a record store. How sad for you. Joe made a face like he was about to cry. Be nice, Jose, Mrs. Hidalgo said in a warning voice. Malu, I want to hear more about that later, but right now I want you to listen to something. Could you pull The Brat out of there, please? I moved my fingers through the B's to find the album, sandwiched alphabetically after Bad Brains and before Best Coast was Lola Beltran, the wailing lady with the spider leg eyelashes. It was weird how she seemed to be everywhere. I still hadn't listened to the CD I'd borrowed from Senora Aurelia. I kept flipping until I spotted The Brat. There was only one record. I recognized the cover from the wall at Kalaka. The band photo had an 80s punk look, all black and white on a red and orange background. The band's name was printed at the top in a funky font that included a backward R at the bottom. The title of the album was Attitudes, written in white script that was visible against the black of the men's shirts. I pulled out the record and handed it to Mrs. Hidalgo. She slipped the record out of its cardboard sleeve and placed it on the record player, then carefully lowered the needle onto the vinyl. I heard the familiar popping and crackling, my favorite sounds in the whole world, and then the first song started. It began with a reggae rhythm on guitar, those bouncy staccato sounds that made me think of being at the beach. Then came the drums, heavy on the cymbals, and finally a woman's voice that was like the hot chocolate Mom made in the winter, thick and warm and strong. The song went from its reggae intro to poppy punk. I couldn't resist moving to the beat. Okay, so maybe punks did dance. This is amazing, I said. Who is she? I picked up the album cover and studied the photo of the woman whose voice sang out from the speakers. It's Teresa, I'm going to probably butcher this, Covarrubias, Mrs. Hidalgo said. The Brat was a Los Angeles band in the early 80s. This is so rad, I said. And they're Chicanos, Mexican Americans, Mrs. Hidalgo said. Like us. Like us. I repeated the words in my head. The next song came on. It was another fast pop-punk song with a reggae beat. I'm going to leave you two to your musical nerd fest, Joe said. Later, Maria Luisa. Walk her home, Joe, Mrs. Hidalgo said. Please? Do I have to? Joe whined. I'll make you mix sometime, Malu, Mrs. Hidalgo said, ignoring Joe. You should know all punk has to offer, not just the standards. And you should know your people's influence on the genre. It's part of your history. Thanks, Mrs. H, I said, and followed Joe upstairs, still hearing the music in my head, and Mrs. Hidalgo saying, like us. She must have known that I'm a coconut who doesn't even eat cilantro. Your mom's great, I said to Joe as we walked back to my building. You don't know how good you have it. She's all right, he said, a little weird, but I haven't even told my mom about the band. Seriously, Joe asked. Why not? She wouldn't like it, I said. Anyway, she doesn't really have to know. As long as I do well in school and don't complain about being here, she's happy. If you say so, Joe said, sounding unconvinced. Practice at your place tomorrow, right? I asked. Yeah, Joe said, tomorrow and forever from the looks of it. I thought about Mrs. Hidalgo saying that it was important to know my history. Mom had said the same thing when she was telling me about Posada. But the history Mom was talking about was totally different than the history Mrs. Hidalgo was talking about, wasn't it? Chapter 19. Is that what you're wearing? Mom was like a scratched record with that question. She eyed the blue and green plaid Catholic school jumper I wore. I'd found it on one of my thrift store adventures with Dad. Today I'd paired it with a white Spins and Needles Records t-shirt, blue striped tube socks, and my sequin chucks. It was my punk Dorothy look. You're going to need something comfortable, something you can move in. You mean like this? I asked, and I jumped up and down and jogged in place and lifted my knees as high as I could. Mom sighed. Don't you think it's time you started acting and dressing a little bit like una señorita? I'm wearing a dress, I said, and I gave her a curtsy. That's señorita-like. Her look told me my outfit was not what she had in mind. Even though Mom said it was very rude, I put my headphones on for the train ride. She could drag me to this thing, but I didn't have to talk to her. The dance school was in a huge warehouse-type building that also housed other businesses. The door had the words Ramirez Dance Studio stenciled in big gold letters. Below it, in smaller letters, it read, Teaching Mexican Folklore Dance since 1998. Mom opened the door, and we were greeted by the sound of heels banging against the wooden floor. Selena and a boy a little older than us stopped dancing. They were the only other people there besides Selena's mom. Senora Ramirez smiled big when she saw us. She turned off the music that was still playing and walked over. Magali, Maria Luisa. She gave us both a hug. I'm so glad you came. This is my son, Gael, and you know Selena. The two walked over, clomping the whole way like a couple of horses. Selena, get Maria Luisa a pair of shoes, Senora Ramirez said. This is going to be fun. For who? See, Mommy, Selena said. Come on, Maria Luisa. Shoes? I asked, looking at Mom. Those won't do at all, Senora Ramirez said, pointing to my sneakers. You need something with a hard heel to make noise. She stomped her own shiny little black shoes against the floor, and Mom gave a startled laugh. I don't think we're going to have anything to match that outfit, Selena said, as we walked to a wall of cubbies full of shoes that reminded me of a bowling alley. What size? Very funny, I said. The cubbies were filled with the kinds of shoes I would never voluntarily wear. They had buckles and heels, and they wouldn't go well with cutoffs. Selena handed me a pair of scuffed brown shoes in my size and walked back to where our moms waited. I changed into the shoes and clip-clopped to a case full of ribbons, sashes, certificates, trophies, and plaques. Some of them were awarded to Ramirez Dance Studio, but many were in Selena's or Gail's name. There were also photos of Ramirez dancers, most of them featuring Selena and her mom. Wow, Mom said. She's really good, huh? Senora Ramirez beamed and nodded. She and her brother have been dancing since they were little, she said. Gail, come on. Why don't you show them your dance for the Mexican Independent Day Parade? We have a float that features our dancers every year. Selena rolled her eyes. She looked annoyed as she turned to join her brother, but by the time she got into formation, she replaced her annoyed look with a big smile, her eyes crinkling at the corners. When the music started, it sounded like tiny bells and jumping string instruments. I watched as Selena and her brother stomped back and forth and side to side. Selena lifted and bowed and waved her skirt so fast it was dizzying. All the while, she kept a smile on her face. Joe was right about the cucaracha killing. No bug that had the misfortune of finding itself under their shoes was coming out alive. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see Mom sway in place and smiling like she was about to jump in and dance too. Maybe she was thinking about what it would be like to have a daughter like Selena. When the music stopped and the dance ended, Mom burst into applause. She nudged me with her elbow and I clapped my hands a few times. Amazing, Mom said. That was beautiful. If the look on her face was an emoji, it would have been the smiley face with hearts for eyes. Selena and her brother said thank you at the same time. Gail changed into his sneakers, said goodbye, and made a quick exit, the lucky dog. Well, let's show you some basic steps. See? Senora Ramirez asked. Selena, work with La Senora Morales, and I'll see if I can help Maria Luisa find a little rhythm. Selena cackled like the Wicked Witch of the West. Good luck with that, Mommy, she said, leading Mom by the arm. A good teacher is encouraging, Selena, her mom said, taking my hand. She stomped out a beat, and I tried to follow, but my feet felt like they were weighed down by big Frankenstein shoes. Just loosen up, Senora Ramirez advised, shimmying and waving her arms around like she was blowing in the wind. Look, your mom has got it. I looked over at Mom, and she was laughing as she sashayed and stomped like it was the happiest day of her life. Meanwhile, I felt like the Tin Man who'd been left out in the rain to rust in need of some serious oil for his joints. I tried to remember the feeling I had at punk shows when the music just took over and I felt free to move without being judged. This wasn't a punk show, though, and I felt ridiculous. So for the next hour, I did what Dad had advised. I just tried. But when Senora Ramirez went left, I went right. It seemed that no matter how much I tried to keep up with her, I couldn't. How did Selena do this? That was one of the most fun things I've ever done, Mom said when the dance class was over. Her face was flushed and the strands of her hair had come loose from her bun. You did great, Senora Ramirez said. You too, Maria Luisa. She patted me on the shoulder in a consoling manner. Yeah, right, I mumbled. Our next session is in 2 weeks if you'd like to sign up, Senora Ramirez said. Oh, I do, Mom said with a nod. I gave her a look of terror. Let me get you a brochure so you can see what we offer, Senora Ramirez said. You can sign up online or just do it when you come in for the first class. She walked towards the office, Selena following close behind.